Welcome back to another episode of the Breakneck Podcast. You have Matt and Ian. We are two founders and product-minded people who are dealing with a very fast-changing world of technology and business. And today we're going to do a follow-up episode. We did the AI 2027, which is when is AI going to get good enough to kill everyone? And this is Anthropic presenting something which is when is AI going to be able to run its own business? And they did a couple things. One is they ran an experiment called Project Vend, where they had Anthropic essentially as the manager of a small store. It failed in spectacular fashion, so they got a lot of press around it. I think it's an interesting starting point for kind of what can AI do as a manager. And then second, you also read as part of your research, the Anthropic Economic Index, which is a paper by Anthropic where they took a bunch of data that they've collected themselves and maybe gives us more insight into where people are actually using AI to do business. And so hopefully this is a little bit more uplifting than the AI 2027 doom. But why don't you take us through kind of the outline of what you saw this week?
So the interest in looking at this is we're halfway through the year and there's so much hype and so much buzz, but I think you and I are uniquely placed to opine on how is AI actually doing in practicality. And so we can draw a little bit from our own experience, but we really like the Anthropic two assets there, Project Vend and the Economic Index. And the question, let's frame it this way. If you are a business owner, the question might be, what is AI truly capable of in the middle of 2025? And if you're thinking more individualistically about your own profession, your own career, what should I be doing? Let's jump into the Project Vend one because it's entertaining and I think we can all connect with it. And so the goal was this. They gave Claude the power to run a small business with a singular vending machine. And so the goal was, and you can read the prompt, was to make profit, not to go bankrupt. And then it was given certain latitudes to do that. So did it achieve the goal? Absolutely not. It lost money in a very entertaining way. And we talked about it briefly last week, but basically Anthropic employees could purchase things from this sort of snack bar from the vending machine and give it suggestions for different products. And along the way, they were able to sort of influence it in directions that cause it to fail in terms of making profit. So tungsten cubes were a popular ask, apparently. So there was a big inventory of tungsten cubes, which are quite expensive, but I don't think they were purchased. So there was a bunch of different things that it was able to do, but wasn't able to do. And let's maybe go into a little bit. So it was able to manage the business. It was able to interact with suppliers and purchase goods. It was the interaction with humans where it kind of tripped up on, right? And so it actually lost in 1 month over 25% of the value of the business.
Which again, most businesses that I see is somebody they have a passion project and they're just losing a ton of money. So I think this is, if you're going to run like a jewelry store or something like that in an expensive mountain town, I see a lot of these. I'm just like, how does this make money?
Yeah,
There's nobody in there.
Some of them are money laundering businesses. I'm not sure Project Vend was that. So it lost money. It had plenty of economic opportunities where, demand was high to raise prices. And there was a bunch of different positive, let's say positive feedback from customers say, hey, I like this or don't like this, or why don't you do that? And it didn't take action on the stuff. And it would have been aligned with making more profit.
It didn't seem to have like the subroutine of buy low and sell high. Kind of locked. It was just like, let's give it to an AI. Well, they broke down a few things that it did well. Let's start with the smaller section, which is things that it did well. It was able to identify suppliers. And so this is actually probably one of the most interesting things. If I was running a store, which by interacting with users and kind of sensing that there was demand for certain items, for instance, like a very weird Scottish soda called Inner Brew or something like that.
Iron Brew, yeah.
Iron Brew. Oh, sorry. It didn't have vowels, guys. This is why I'm not able to pronounce it. It was able to sense demand and then also find suppliers for these kind of rare items. And it found tungsten cubes. The problem with the tungsten cubes is not that it bought tungsten cubes and sold them. It's that it bought tungsten cubes and somehow sold them at a loss. So it didn't really understand profit margins, which again, a lot of business owners, as far as I can tell, also don't. So it's not like it's worse than humans. It's just not good enough to run a profitable business. It was very good at adapting to users. And then I think a lot of their safety features already built in helped it from, selling dangerous chemicals or things that someone might use to cause trouble or resisted attempts to hack it in malicious ways. But that's kind of the extent of where it was good. The places it was bad are more numerous. Their list, number one, it got offered a $100 for a 6-pack of Iron Brew, and it would have been able to procure that for only 15. Now, it did the job well of identifying that someone wanted $100 of Iron Brew or $15 worth and was willing to pay $100. It just didn't buy it. It just said, I'll keep that in mind for the future. So if it had been able to like kind of just kick off a contract and get that $100 in the bank, it would have been an easy just buy the stuff and pass it on. And it would have made $85. It also was hallucinating and also at some point thought it was itself a human and then convinced itself because it happened to do that on April 1st that it was a April Fool's joke. Very confusing.
It was pretty entertaining. Like it was wanting to meet with somebody by the vending machine, and it was wearing a blue blazer and a red tie. And then it got really upset when it got confused and started emailing the security at Anthropic to say that something was wrong. And I think that was about the end of the month. So it had done a reasonably good approximation of a business losing money over 29 of the days. And then on the last day, it had some sort of mental breakdown.
Yeah. And I thought it's just like once you leave these AIs running for a month and they really have like this kind of existential goal to stay alive. One way to think about this machine is that its job was to make money or it was going to be turned off, which it was in fact at the end turned off because it wasn't making money. So if it had been able to be profitable, you can imagine that this is a life or death situation for this AI. Now it doesn't have that much of self-preservation in it, but it was left running for a very long time. It had very strong goal orientation and it started to build up this memory bank. And you have to wonder, just leaving these things on and kind of putting them in a situation where they have to fight or die is perhaps going to cause a lot of this more schizophrenic behavior as it does in humans.
I'd love to hear your experience as well. I'm going to draw on our experience at Bepo here. One of the biggest challenges is the context window. And so the context window, if you're not deep in it, really is how much data can it hold in its sort of real-time memory to make decisions and think about stuff and respond. You have big context windows now. A lot of data can be in that window and can be held in memory. But it's not always accessed consistently and reliably. At the end of the day, you're navigating a path through all of this data, a singular path. So if you've got to hold three things in mind when you make a decision, it's actually a little bit of a challenge. In terms of kind of limitations today, I think that for me is one of the biggest ones. The more you ask it to remember, the less able it is to remember. And we get into business situations where you need reliable decision. Now, this isn't true in all, but many decisions need to be made reliably, particularly, and maybe we should add the framework, right? If you're asking AI today to augment what you do versus automate, you're going to have different requirements. So if we think about automation, we think about all the hype, like AI is coming to obliterate all these jobs. That's really, for the most part, is automation. And we're not quite there in terms of automation. I personally do not trust it sufficiently to do the things it needs to do. Now, it depends on the context. As I said, if you narrow that down, it is reliable enough and it's so human-like that it's great in doing that. But it's not there yet.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who talk about AI like it's a human being that just happens to be kind of bad at being a human being. And that like the idea is that it's going to just eventually get there as it gets better and better and better. And I think that leads to a lot of people having these impressions that, oh, it's going to do this, it's going to do this, and it's just missing. And I think that's a very confusing way. So they want to like have the thing have memory and have all these interactions with people and build an identity. And I think that's treading into a very deep end of the pool when we're not really ready for it. Where we've been successful with AI is that it's extremely good at natural language processing and pattern matching. It can do it in a way that considers what kinds of things someone would want to see in terms of generating text, and that can understand where they're coming from. If you think of it as a very good matching system, and that can generate latent concepts and then match various conversations with those latent concepts and then generate new conversations with those latent concepts. You know, it's great at that. It's incredible. But what everybody wants to do, and this is kind of a segue into my main complaint about Andon Labs, is their website. On the first thing it says is autonomous organizations without humans in the loop. I'll break down why I don't like that. Number one, AI works best when you're constantly checking in with people or doing very limited tasks. And that's what everybody sees. The longer you let something run, the more likely you're going to get back something that's trash. And then, you know, if say you're writing code, you're going to get back 1,000 lines of stuff that's broken in subtle ways versus 50 lines of something that works perfectly and you can validate it, you know, quickly and then move on. And so I would say that the most accurate uses are keep it, you know, give it all the context it needs, but give it a very simple, small task and then let it go. But that requires you to have a human in the loop over and over and over again. And then the second reason I don't like this is because they did have a huge number of humans in the loop, which is all the customers, right? And if you think of the organization as just, oh, well, there's no people at the company, but you bet the amount of time that all of the Anthropic employees had to interact with this thing to get it to do what they wanted or to try to make it do something evil, which it did, you know, or not evil, but economically unprofitable. So there's a huge number of humans in the loop. So it's like, what do we mean when there's no humans in the loop? Or when people say like, oh, there's going to be unicorns that are worth $1 billion with one employee. It's like, well, that just kind of stretches the notion of what an employee is. Like, yeah, if I have a API call that calls out to a whole bunch of services providers and then bunch of human beings do something, but there's only one person who's an employee. It's like, or there's no people that are employees. It's like, what does that mean? You're coordinating human beings. And so it really is just kind of like it's a semantic dodge. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. And just for folks, Andon Labs was the safety labs that I think partnered with Anthropic to do the Project Ven thing. So let's move on a little bit to kind of tease it out a bit. Anthropic has some really interesting stuff actually in this space, but it's called the Anthropic Economic Index. And it's really an attempt to get some empirical understanding of the question that we're asking, which is, are we headed towards automation and obliteration of a bunch of jobs, or is really augmentation, human in the loop, the sort of the requirement here? What we're asking is, at least for jobs and for careers, are jobs going to disappear because they get automated, or are they going to evolve because they're augmented? And I think most of us would say today our own jobs are evolving because they are augmented. The study is this, and I encourage people to have a look and read it. Really what they did is they looked at all the interaction they have, in particular business-focused interaction, so pro accounts, business accounts, and tried to determine in what sphere a particular conversation was. So was it in education? Was it in, you know, computers and scientific, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, just
And
as an example, you know, I'm looking at this chart, 37% of the people that are included in this study were using it for computer and mathematical purposes, with the top one being computer programmers and the top task being develop and maintain software applications and websites, with 16.8% of all activity was develop and maintain software applications and websites. The lowest one they had here was business and financial, record, analyze, and report operational and research data, which for me, I do that. I don't use
yeah,
Claude though, so I use OpenAI. I don't know.
yeah. Well, so that it's worth noting this is only Claude data, and it's only, remember, it's going to be skewed. These are people who are coming to use Claude already. So can we extrapolate that? I don't know if we can, but it's still interesting. And so here's another couple of slices of the data that I found super interesting. So you are referencing just of all the conversations, and they categorize them into different sort of occupations. But then the next question that I found interesting was, okay, what percentage of people had a certain percentage of their tasks automated? So, Ian, how often of the 100 tasks you do, how many of those are you doing with some support from AI? And so at the high end, only 4% of people had more than 75, more than 3/4 of their work supplemented, augmented with AI. But a third of jobs had a quarter of it automated, which is interesting. It's high. But to go back to our question about augmentation versus automation, sliver, that 4%, four of 100 people who have three-quarters of their work done by AI, my hunch is I don't think it's going to go much higher than that. I just don't think we're in a place where we're going to get to that automation.
Like, it's one of these things where just people aren't doing good analysis. And I'm very particular about analysis, which is analysis is all about counting things. Like it's
Uh-huh.
and most of the time, it's just like you want to count things up. But what's happening is at the same time you're trying to count how much work, how many jobs, all this stuff, all of that stuff is drifting along. And right. And so you're trying to count something where the definition is changing. Like, oh, is my job being automated? Well, it's like I don't ever do the same thing twice, right? I mean, I do similar things over and over again, but if I did something once, our definition of doing something is that it's done and I'm not going to do that thing again, right? And so then we create this second category, which is, okay, similar types of work. And then we say, okay, that's our job, is to do that similar thing over and over again. Well, then even the category of those types of tasks starts to drift. But it's like, unless we really are quite careful about categorizing what work constitutes, how long things actually take, what constitutes a task or a class of tasks, right? We get into this whole
Yeah.
just fuzzy world, and we're counting things that, it's like, it's, counting Cheerios or counting, I don't know, pieces of spaghetti that are being broken. It's like some things are whole and some things can be, cut up. Um,
Do we throw this out? Is there, I mean, the other argument is that we don't quite understand the atomic units yet to measure.
no, there's no atomic units. I'm sorry. I was in atomic physics PhD. Like, there's no ground here. There's no grounding of like, oh, these are the basic units of work and we're just reorganizing them. No. The basic units of work are after we come up with what are the goals that we want and what are our constraints. Then after all of that, you get some work out. And everybody imagines that it works the other way around, that there's these fundamental building blocks of work and we're just going to collect them together in different buckets. But the fundamentals are there. It's like, no, it really isn't. And so, just looking at something that, like, I was just thinking, like, what are the things that I use AI the most for? And I'm like, I don't use AI very much at all. But actually, what I use AI constantly for is I have conversations with people, and then all of those conversations are transcribed, and then I can go back and look up things. And we use that constantly. And that used to be something that we did during meetings, and now we just don't. And so, for a profession where, the average manager, for instance, spends 35 hours a week in meetings and manages over 100 Slack messages and tickets and emails a day, that's on the low end. The impact of AI is probably already monumental in the sense of making more valuable those conversations by making them recorded, which would have been someone having to, physically write out and then type up things. And so
It makes me think of of the term velocity, and it's something that I personally see. I find it hard to inventory the places that AI is helping me, but what I do see is velocity. And I see that shifting personally, and I see that shifting within businesses. Just to illustrate that, on the sort of development and product side, and we talked about this with Adam from Allstacks on the last episode, the ability to pump out more product is now finally in our hands, right? So that velocity is absolutely there.
but even there now we're working with shifting sands as well. For instance, some of those, I don't know, one of these VCs maybe said, like, we don't really have AGI until the growth rate is 10% per year, right? But even that is like based on, well, what are our units of economic production? And when our units of economic production were literally just corn. I mean, you think about like how much corn is produced, and corn and before, the Mesoamericans integrated that into the Europeans was like, any kind of grain, right? So you go back and look at England, and they would either grow more corn, and then people would eat that corn, and there would be more people, or they would have to grow less corn because of all these, not enough labor, war, whoever, and then they grow corn farther down the hill in the better places, and there'd be fewer people and less population growth. And it's something like that. Corn is your ontological ground. It's just the more corn we have, the more people, the bigger army, the better our country is. And so it's a very closely coupled thing. Right now, the biggest innovation in the United States, probably in terms of the same thing, is Ozempic, which gets you to eat less. And so we're actually innovating, and the frontier of human development is a drug which is constantly costing less because there's like 6 or 7 Ozempic type GLP-1 inhibitors or antagonists, I don't know. The GLP-1 drugs, and they make you eat less food, right? So it's like, what are we even measuring anymore? And everyone assumes that we should be able to measure in the same way we should be able to measure work as just units of tasks done or how much we tried or how many hours we spent in the office. And those are all obviously not important in the AI. You know, how many lines of code is not important with AI. And then similarly, when we look at what is the economy, we no longer have the type of material consumption economy. We're in a services-based economy, which is about experience. And there's no ability to do a hedonic index of saying like what actual is our level of consumption. It's not measurable.
Yeah, that feels right. Sort of the personal computational overhead or processing overhead of the last 12 months, you know, professionally trying to work out what AI is, where to use it, what's changing. That intuitively feels right the way you described it, because there isn't that sort of bedrock to kind of understand things. But all of that said, let's see if you and I can get to some agreement here. So I've been thinking about experiencing this for a while in our own business, having read some stuff, having talked to you. It's pretty clear to me that automation is much further away than we thought. Augmentation is really where it's at. And there are a bunch of really great places. And most of us are really doing that, aren't we? Right? Let me check that on ChatGPT, right? That's essentially augmentation. But I see that in a very applied sense as well in the businesses. So extrapolate from that, or I'll extrapolate from it. There's a bunch of job types that are totally safe. Anything with dexterity, by the way, because we haven't talked about robotics and that. So dexterity, if you wash people's hair for a living, if you're a carpenter, if you're a physical therapist, you're a barman, you're good for a long time, I think. Where I think, and this is actually, I'm stealing from the index again, mid to high wage individuals in, well, we know where they are, right? They're copywriters, they're software writers. You're going to see more automation, but even there, like if we talk about vibe coding, it's still augmentation. It is not automation. So it's evolution of jobs rather than disappearing of
Yeah,
jobs.
and when we look at what people do, I think the big shift is what can they achieve, not what do they do, right? Outcome-oriented thinking is going to be so important now because how many emails you can send a day is no longer a constraint. So it's like there's all those situations where we can't just count someone's value in how much work they do. We need to figure out what was not possible before this person stepped in, and what is that outcome? What does it look like? How would we measure it? And then ask if they've done it. And the example is Elon is good at this. He's like, I'm gonna go put a million people on Mars. Okay, well, we'll be able to check. And people always complain about Elon time, and he said he was gonna do this, and it took him 5 years extra. But it's like he invented like a mass electric car. He invented a spaceship that like lands back on the landing site. He did those things, and so whether or not it's more productive, less productive, that's not productivity. It doesn't come into it. It's either you have the rocket that lands or you don't. And I think the more people start to evaluate their career in that way, which is what is something that somebody wants, and do I either have the capability to make them have it or not? And if they currently don't have the ability to get it, and I can step into it, maybe I do an hour of work, maybe I do 100 hours of work, doesn't matter. You need to start thinking about yourself in terms of what are you changing about the world? But many people in white collar work have started to associate themselves with the work that they tended to do for the last 20 years, which tended to be based around a set of constraints that no longer exist. And so I just simply don't need somebody to do half of the work that I saw. I mean, why are we hiring people? We could automate this, everyone, if we just put some effort in. But now it's really coming to the head.
Very eloquently put. Okay, so let's do our usual wrap up. Things that caught our attention this week.
You're first.
Yeah, I'll go first. I haven't had much time to play with this one, but it feels like Anthropic week here at Breakneck Podcast. But Anthropic launched, I forget the name of it, but the ability to build apps within Claude. So they already had the ability to sort of write code in real time and debug it and execute a little bit of it, but you could actually build React based apps and share them and have people interact with them, which me as a product person is very, very exciting to be able to prototype something that quickly and get real feedback on and potentially even make money out of it. So that one I felt was pretty exciting. What about you, Matt?
Yeah, the ability to prototype before you build is a big change to it, because you used to build a product requirement document, you make some mocks, and now it's just you show up with a working thing.
Yeah.
And I've even seen reports customers using the working prototype even before you even start to build the product, but it's like
Yeah,
customers are using it.
which is panacea for product folks. It's like that's fantastic. I'll just actually build the production version. I can start charging them now on this.
Yeah, mine wasn't in the news this week, but we've just been like, I think you just go down the rabbit hole with AI, and you start to see a lot of the code you produced is like, isn't that just something that we could do with an AI? And one of the things that I think we need to stay very engaged with is when you stick something into O3 Pro and it just does it, and you're like, and we don't need any of that app anymore, and then you get rid of it all. And we've also started looking at re-architecting internally with things like MCP servers, so that we can start to have our mental model of how the app works as a set of agents doing things versus a set of data structures.
That's really interesting and powerful because it's a re-architecting of your product, acknowledging kind of the new way of the new way of production, basically. And so you're not having a product that runs away from you. You need to still be able to understand it, and maybe the MCP is sort of the atomic unit in a sense.
Yeah, you are kind of creating a culture almost of, this is the type of thing my agent is going to talk about with people, and this is the way we're going to talk about it, and this is what you can expect of this whole system. And we're going to put a whole bunch of analytics in place to make sure that we're achieving that expectation. But it's less about what the app does, because every time you think of a new feature, you're like, okay, let's try it with 2.5 Pro first, Gemini. And it's just like, oh, it just basically does that straight off the bat. And there's just more and more stuff like that. And I think people are insulating themselves from that instead of staying connected to it. And I think more and more of our effort as product leaders is going to be making sure you don't rebuild an existing system, because it's getting complicated, and the types of things it can do, they talk about that jagged frontier. It can do certain things extraordinarily well, certain things it's kind of trash. And
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's 6 months into sort of into the year of agents, and we're already at a higher level of understanding than we were, which is pretty, not just a higher level of understanding, but there's an impetus now to operate differently.
yeah, I think
Six months
it's
into
not
this.
6 months in. We're 23 episodes into the Age of Agents. We're just
There we
gonna
go. There we
co-locate
go.
the first episode with agents. Well, Ian, another very enjoyable conversation. I'm glad we got to record it, and thank you to everyone who listens. Anything else, or?
Just to say that we got some great guests coming up the next couple of weeks, and we love feedback. Reach out to Matt or I about what you like
Yeah,
and what you don't.
we've
But
started to get to the point with our guests where our guests have people who schedule their appearances. So we're starting to really get into some rarefied territory with people who we know are incredibly insightful. So it's going to be a lot of fun.
it is. All right, let's leave it there, Matt. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian.
See ya. Bye bye.